Oh, that's because the camera's showing the ceiling. I would explain it.
Oh, it's gonna fall back again. It needs to be tight on the side, I think.
Does it look like it's slipping?
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. Okay. So let me just check the roll. Dunkirk's there. Almost there. And you guys are here as well. So in the last class, we were going over that article about life in Palestine in 1914. And anybody can remember what they said determines what Palestine is and who the Palestinians are? What was the key indicator? What does their culture spring from? The one word.
Oh, it means,
Say what?
does it mean Jerusalem?
Say what?
Does it mean Jerusalem?
No, that's what Al-Quds means.
Oh, good.
But the article, when we finished, talked about how the character and the culture of the Palestinian people is determined by what? What does it come out of?
That's the land.
The land, yeah. So, and that struck me for a couple of reasons. One is, whenever I do any of my classes, my mind just keeps working until I get to the next one. I have to switch gears. But yesterday was kind of a busy day. But by the time I finally got home, I started to think about Gone with the Wind. And again, I don't know if you've ever seen the film, but there's the scene where Scarlett O'Hara, just on the eve of the war, says to her father, "Land, who cares about the land?" And he's an Irishman who came to the United States, and he goes, "Why, Katie Scarlett O'Hara, how can you talk that way? Why, land is," I don't know, it sounds like I wrote the movie. "Why, land is the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that lasts." And he said, "Oh, but you're young. This love of the land will come to you eventually." And of course, if you've seen the film or read the book, you know, the war happens, she loses everything, Tara gets destroyed, and then she does everything she can, illegal, immoral, to hang on to that land. And so I don't know, has anyone seen Gone with the Wind lately, or anyone seen it at all? It's a classic. I know it's 1939, but it's in color. It's on TV all the time. It's better than that dopey Titanic movie. That's on all the time, and I hate that film, but that's a separate issue. And of course, they sink on water, so it has nothing to do with it. But I was struck by that dialogue, and obviously I've seen the movie so much I could reenact it. But this whole idea that land was key to understanding the Irish character, and that land is key to understanding the Palestinian character. And so when you move people off the land, like the dominant Zionist philosophy said, because Palestinians are fungible, they can go any place in the Arab world and feel right at home. First of all, I think that's not true, but it's also dismissive of their claim to the land. So I keep talking about what the Zionists, with their made up fact, they're on the grounds where they say, you know, Israel is a land for people without land, on a land without people. But this article, 1914, clearly states that if you want to understand the Palestinian people and the Palestinian culture, you have to understand the land. And I'm still trying to find those two videos that I really like. Eventually, maybe we'll look at them. So that's the key. And when you remove people, like in the case of the Civil War, when people lost their plantations and got moved out, that was physically, economically, psychologically scarring, and it certainly scarred Scarlett, no pun intended, O'Hara. And so she does everything she can to keep it. And of course, she keeps it, but by the end of the movie, she loses her husband. But that became so important to her. Better he should go than I lose my land. So when you move 750,000 Palestinians off their land in the late 1940s, and you justify it by saying they're fungible, and there's this whole Arab world for them to go to, but there's no place for Jews to go to, it's not only unjust, it's simply untrue. And so there's more to this article, but that was a good breaking point, because actually, if you remember to the last class, the other thing I was going to do was start talking about the online simulation, but when I took a look at what I downloaded from Dr. Kaufman, the copy I had was incomplete. I don't know how, but now it's complete. But let me stop for a minute and see if anybody has a question or comment with the article to the extent that we did do with it before I go ahead. Because I like to think that, if we do this right, you're thinking about this stuff too, but I can't stop thinking about everything I'm doing. Yes?
Is there any way for you to put it on Blackboard so we can read the entire article?
I'll have to ask, because it's copyrighted material, and then I would have to get somebody who could scan it and put it up, but let me ask, because I don't know if we can. So I probably could put it on reserve on the 3 campuses maybe, which would require you to go to the library and check it out, but I'll see if I can do it, because I don't know if we can. Yes?
If not, are you able to copy what you have and give us print copies of it, or no?
Yeah, I think we're small enough. See, copyright laws are kind of strict. Typically, if you copy the whole thing, that's potentially a violation, even if you're using it for educational purposes, as opposed to, I doubt anyone's going to crack down on us for a 1940 National Geographic article. So let me see what magic I can do. I'll check on Blackboard, especially because of our other sites, but making this many copies also chews up a lot of paper, but because it's a fairly thick article. And what I've been doing with the presentation was just highlighting the key things. It's an interesting article. There's a lot of stuff in there that's not that important, but you still might find it interesting. But that's a good point. I'll see if I can make magic happen. Anybody else have a question, comment, or concern? We think we're copacetic? Okay, so one of the things we got to think about, and we're always going to have more than one thing going on at any one time, but if you take another look at the syllabus at some point, you'll see that it's talking about how we're going to participate in the simulation playing the role of the Palestinian Authority. So somebody for one of the 3 classes has to volunteer to be the head of the delegation. Which entails you coordinating the work of the other people. And then we're going to be working on 3 different issues. And now that I actually have the material, and I will try to blow this up. Can we see this okay in Dunkirk and Olean? So the first issue, and Joyce goes through with a synopsis, and we'll be talking about this, but one person plays the head of the delegation representing Palestinian Authority. Now, with the EU simulation, I've had students playing the role of Sweden put forth the Palestinian perspective. And I had some very talented people who put some stuff together that I still have, which I think will be very helpful to us, including one of my students who is now up at UB. And she played the role of the press, and she was explaining what the Palestinian situation was. As I mentioned to you, the Palestinian Authority does have a seat in the UN General Assembly, and some countries have recognized their right to exist. And in terms of the simulation, you don't have to be a country to be in there, because we're also going to have the EU. But one of the issues that's going to be negotiated is, you can see, the economics, the future of multilateral trade agreements, and the WTO. Now, don't panic if you know nothing about multilateral trade agreements and the WTO. We're going to have someone in class who's going to volunteer to be the Minister of Economics. So I often suggest, if you've been studying any economics or something related, that you might want to be the Minister of Economics. And let me just, Joyce does an excellent job of explaining everything. But one of the things she does, at the end of each issue, she poses what she calls questions for consideration. And at some point, the Palestinian Authority in general, through the head of the delegation, has to prepare an opening statement for putting in the negotiation. And then the economics minister will have to put in an opening statement dealing with the economic issues. But you don't do this alone, you do this in conjunction with me, so again, don't panic. The Palestinian Authority opening statement from the head of government can deal with these specific issues, but also can deal with the issues that we have been talking about up to this point, that Palestine deserves to be a country, that the Israelis need to move out of the occupied territories, that Jerusalem needs to be an international city, and so all that sort of stuff that would clearly say to the world, it's an injustice to deny us Palestine as an independent nation state, and that has to be rectified. So each of my delegations, because you'll hear the EU will say something different, you can bet the North Koreans will say something totally different. But every time my countries or JCC delegations do an opening statement, they address the particular issues coming out of that part of the world. And in our case, as the Palestinians, it's, the injustice done to us by the Israelis temporarily occupying our territory, denying us the right in the name of Zionism to have a nation state, and so that we as Palestinians, and during the simulation, we will start thinking of ourselves as Palestinians. And don't worry about the simulation, it's web-based, it's real easy to maneuver. So when the person decides to become the economics minister, the opening statement would reflect some of these questions. One, can countries arrive at a short-term approach to adjudicate disputes within the WTO framework? Well, one of the things we need to become a country so that we can be involved in this. As you notice, Dr. Kaufman keeps talking about countries. Well, we can have a position on this, but our fundamental position is, well, we need to be a country. Two, if the rules of the WTO have made it difficult for countries to move forward and establish new trade agreements, can the international community, which certainly would include Palestine, work together to alter those rules? And three, at a time when countries seem to be leaving multilateral international trade agreements, can countries work on a framework that would outline an approach to international trade, bilateral versus multilateral, and the costs and benefits? So I don't know if there's anybody in these rooms who knows anything about economics, global business. You don't have to say that now. On the other hand, if somebody does have some background and you'd like to tell us, anybody economics or business student? Or anything somewhat related? Because I don't remember what you're all working on. Well, you don't have to be an economics expert to do this. And of course, you will always have help from me as your congenial tour guide. So, what we're looking at is the Palestinian perspective. Now, how can we participate if you don't recognize our right to exist as a country? How can we participate if we don't have control over our own natural resources? These opening statements, somewhat general but somewhat specific. And in negotiations, I always distinguish between what I call a hard posture versus a soft posture. Oops, I went too far. Palestinian Authority has to be somewhat loud. We have absolutely no power in negotiations. So how do we get anybody to pay attention? We have to be loud, to the extent you can with a text-based simulation. And we have to keep arguing the injustice of how we've been treated and how our people don't have the opportunity to participate because they're walled in this occupied territory. And we'll put in more specific references to the Palestinian situation. So you have to start to become Palestine. So everything that I've been doing, at least with this introductory stuff, is aimed towards that. That we are Palestine, we want a country, and we have a position on these issues. And we'll work on that. But for the last 2.5 weeks, I've been trying to develop an understanding of what it might be to be Palestine and Palestinians. The second issue, it's a good one. It's a human rights issue, migration, immigration, and labor. This one certainly affects Palestine because many Palestinians who live in the occupied territories work outside of the occupied territories in Israel, if you will, and then have to go through the checkpoints and get held up and have to build an extra time to get through the checkpoints to get to their jobs. So, and then of course with the Gaza Strip, which is part of Palestine, people basically are trapped in there. You have almost no opportunity to get out. So it's one of the reasons why it's so poor. So we would certainly want freedom of movement for our workers. And then, again, Joyce poses questions for us. Number one, how can countries work together to create a common set of standards for all workers? How would these standards be implemented? Can countries arrive at an international set of priorities that, I think there's a typo, and goals for dealing with issues of immigration, migration, and the labor force? So I don't know if there's anybody who's an expert on human rights. This is a specific aspect of human rights, but Palestinians would argue, certainly I would agree, that we are denied our basic political and economic rights. We're not full citizens of Israel. We have trouble getting to our work if it's outside of the occupied territories. Therefore, we have trouble feeding our families and taking care of our families, and that becomes a real issue. And again, if you don't know anything about this, don't panic. I am here to be your congenial tour guide in general, and then also what might be the Palestinian position. So the next one is environment. COP25, beyond the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And as usual, Joyce gives us questions. And we'll learn about this under the new set of rules. Countries are required to report publicly the progress they are making. How can countries be encouraged to put forth their progress? 2, how can the developed countries help provide funding or other incentives to the smaller and poorer countries? Now, we're not a country as Palestine, but we would be considered small and poor. So how can the rest of the world help us to cut global emissions? And then can countries arrive at a set of rules around a fair and transparent global carbon trading system? Again, if you don't know anything about these issues, don't panic. I'm not trying to turn you into environmental, human rights, or economics experts. What I'm trying to do is help us to understand what the Palestinian position might be on those issues. And there is a Palestinian position, especially with the environment. To a great extent, we don't have control over our own resources, including water. The Israelis control our water supply and then sell it back to us. So with the simulation, I'm going to take on, I'm not going to be as balanced. I like to think with what we're doing up to this point, I'm just trying to be somewhat balanced. But in the simulation, as Palestine, we can't be balanced. There's no doubt that there's water in Palestine that the Israelis take and then sell it back to us. Palestinian position is, why don't you just leave our water alone and stop taking it and then selling it back to us? That seems patently unjust. And this isn't a part of the world where water is not plentiful. What's also even more interesting, if I can just divert a little bit, when I was in Palestine, in all the different cities, most of the villages had underground wells that they would fill up with rainwater. And it doesn't rain that often over there. But because water is scarce, they dug wells, and when it rained, it would be in, a lot of the houses were built around courtyards. And the rain would go into the well, it would even drain off the ground into the well. And so they had a supply of water. But when you go into these villages, I can't understand what the justification for this is. The Israeli government ordered all the villages to close their wells, and they're locked. So A, you can't collect rainwater, which I think is a tremendous waste in an area that's parched. And that was a very clever idea. Well, we can't collect water, we don't have a lot of water, so let's collect all the rainwater. Well, they can't. The Israeli government won't let them. I don't know what the justification for that is, other than it increases the water sales. But then you go to cities or villages. We were in Bethlehem, and one of the families was talking to us, and they said, well, the Israeli government typically only allows us to have water for 2 or 3 hours a day. So then we run around filling up jugs and bathtubs and sinks so that we can get through the rest of the day, to flush the toilet, to take a bath, to cook. What's the reason for that? Now, I can't think of any valid reason to keep people from collecting rainwater, especially in this era when we're concerned about the environment and we don't want to waste water. And I mean, even people in this area, although we have plenty of water, sometimes collect rainwater, if only for their garden. You don't want to waste it. But this is a situation in which you can't collect rainwater. We only let you have water maybe 2-3 hours a day. And you have to pay us for the water that we took from your land. Now, if you're a Palestinian or sympathetic, I can't understand what reason there would be except for trying to make life so difficult for you, you'll eventually just get up and move on your own. I mean, I'm open to suggestions. Can anybody think of a reason? Because we can't get any explanation from the Israeli. Yes, did you have an explanation?
If it's a heavily industrialized area, you're talking about emissions, but if we, like, I doubt this, but like acid rain, that would be unhealthy, right?
Yeah, but are you trying to say that the Israelis are sealing the wells because they're concerned about acid rain?
Oh, I'm not like collecting rainwater.
Oh,
Let's do it here.
so, what was your point again?
That it's a health concern for rainwater because of,
Right, so that's why I said, are you suggesting that the Israeli government ordered the sealing of the wells to keep people from getting the rainwater because of health concerns? Is that a possible suggestion that you're making?
I thought you were just asking why people wouldn't want to collect rainwater.
No, I was asking, why do the Israelis don't want them to collect rainwater?
Yeah, I agree with you, it doesn't make any sense. I thought you were talking about.
Yeah, well, I thought maybe you're trying to figure out a justification for the Israeli order. But, so what was your point again about acid rain and rainwater?
It's just not healthy.
Well,
If there's a lot of factories nearby and they don't regulate their emissions, then you could have rain that destroys like cars and buildings.
yeah, but then, if that would be the rainwater that goes into the lake that the Israelis pump out and sell back. And it goes through a water purification system, just like I certainly know about Jamestown, where we remove anything harmful from the water before we sell it. There's no great industrial base within the wind stream that would cause that problem. But the big problem is that it's very dry, and you need water both for olive trees that they still have, and in the Israeli case, the citrus fruits. You can't grow that stuff without water. So every drop of water, even if it was tainted by acid rain, would still be precious, especially in an area that's parched. So there's no great, there's a few bigger cities in Israel proper, but there's no great industrial centers, certainly not in Palestine. Or when I gave the illustration of the soap factory, where they're still doing everything basically by hand. There's no big belching smokestacks, and it's all very labor intensive. Excuse me, I was playing and I dropped my paperclip. So here's what we got to do. What's today, Wednesday? I think we got to make a determination about this by Monday. So I need somebody to volunteer to be the head of the delegation, the head of the Palestinian Authority, and then I need an economics minister, a human rights minister, and a environment minister. Once we decide who the ministers are, I'll make sure you get copies of what Joyce said on each of these issues. And it can be anybody on any of the campuses, and including one of our or two of our remote students. So I guess what I would ask you is just think about it. And if you don't know about the three issues, we'll think of this as an opportunity to learn about it. Because usually when we do the simulation, I have to learn right along with you. I might know a lot about Palestine, and I might know something about these issues, like the multilateral one is the one I probably know the best. And then it's open to question, well, maybe the human rights one, and then maybe the environmental one. I just don't know as much. So, I'd like to finish this on Monday, at least get us set up. So if you think you want to volunteer for one of these slots, let me know. And then people will be in your ministry. So this will be a group project within the context of the course. Yes.
Is there a way that we can access this to read about it before we decide?
Well, if you send me an email directly to me, I can forward the document to you.
Okay.
Probably what I'll do, well, I guess I'll have to, download it in my Word file and then send it to you. That way you have an electronic copy. Because it's 73 pages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because there's also the section on the general conditions that Joyce explains Palestine to us from her perspective, along with what we've been doing. More in the modern context, like that article. Yeah, so we're somewhat stymied because I gotta figure out all this stuff, how to post it. And Joyce stuff is copyrighted, but I know she, if I do anything with it for class, there's not a problem. So I hesitate again to put it on Blackboard, because then I lose complete control. So if you send me an email, I will attempt to download it and then send you a copy in a Word file. And if that doesn't work, probably, well, I got two things. What was the other thing I gotta work on?
The article.
Oh, the article, yeah. You guys are making me work. That's good. Yes. So, yeah, we could do that. The descriptions of the issues are relatively short. And even the description of what's going on in Palestine is relatively short. But Joyce does the description of Palestine as of like this month. Whereas obviously with that article, I'm still taking us through a lot of the history of the past. You really can't understand Palestine without the past, but Joyce is very good at getting us to the present day. And then at some point, because we're going to need something once we finish with the census roster, which I think is due sometime next week, we'll have to come up with a short graded assignment dealing with what we've been talking about. And I'm giving some thought how I want to structure that. It'll be relatively short, but something to get you writing. Okay, anything else? Question, comments, concern? Yes.
Are there any other jobs for the simulation?
Well, there's just the heads, the three ministers, and then the members of the ministry.
Oh, okay.
So we have 4, 7, 9. The 4 top jobs, that leaves 5 people. So then if you're not in the top job, you would join one of the ministries and assist the head of the delegation.
Okay.
The head of the delegation in general is responsible in consultation with other students for preparing the Palestinian open statement. And then the ministries are responsible for preparing the opening statement within the context of their ministry. But you almost always have at least one other person to work with. And you what we normally do is you submit a draft, I take a look at it, I make suggestions, whether it's with respect to sentence structure and grammar as well as substance. And also to set the right tone. We can't be very conciliatory because our backs are up against the wall. And we, meaning Palestine, have, when we negotiate with the Israelis, I don't see how it's a negotiation. They have all the power and we have nothing. So how do you negotiate when you have nothing? And you can't seem to get the world behind you except maybe the EU and a few small countries. So how do you get heard? I always say you got to go in and break the china a little bit. We can't be nice guys. You can afford to be nice when you got the power. When you don't have the power, you can't be nice. So it's asymmetrical in the sense that Israel has all the power with the backing of the United States, and we have pretty much nothing except financial aid from the European Union, recognition by Sweden, and that's nice, but it doesn't overcome the other side. So there's definitely asymmetrical power to the point that we have nothing. The only thing we really have is to raise issues of injustice and constantly educate the world about what's been done to us. That actually is starting to get some traction in the world, but is it too little too late? There are people who are starting to recognize, saying, wow, what we did was wrong. That's the only thing we have left. But, you can't entirely discount that. what people know about you and think about you in diplomacy, that can still have a big effect. You might still lose out, but if that's the only card you have to play, then you got to play it. And we can get the world to understand what has been done to us. So it's kind of like crying the blues and going over all the stuff that's been done to us. Taking away our land, killing our people. How can you stand by and not do anything about this? Well, people have, but there's some traction now in Palestine that people are starting to pay some attention. It's rough. And part of the problem, historically and currently for Palestine, is we don't have a unified leadership. I haven't taken us too far in the modern world, but Joyce does a good job of that. The Gaza Strip on the Mediterranean and the West Bank inland is under the control of two different groups, although both being considered Palestine. And they're physically separated with nothing connecting them. So we're physically separated, we're under different control, but we all consider ourselves to be Palestinians. And living in the Gaza Strip is a nightmare. Living in the West Bank is stressful, but it's not the nightmare that you get in the Gaza Strip. So we have to make the case for why what's been done to us is wrong, and the world has to rectify that. And the only way they can rectify that is by first acknowledging it. And part of the problem is the world really hasn't acknowledged it. There are people in the world who have, but not completely. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Just one more.
Oh, you can have as many as you want. There's no limit.
What's the end goal of this?
Of the simulation?
Yeah.
Well, what we'd like to do, but very seldom does this happen, when you look at the three issues, we try to come up with proposals that the world can agree on. So while this goes on for 5 weeks, by the end of the 5 weeks, all the delegations put up proposals on the three issues, try to get them co-sponsored, and then we vote on them. Now, in the real world, international negotiations is extraordinarily difficult. And when something gets done, it's a minor miracle. The simulation gets so real at times that often most of the proposals put forward don't get accepted. But it's a lesson in the real world that it's not only frustrating to do international negotiations in general, it's particularly frustrating for Palestine. But the smaller countries usually are better negotiators than the big countries. For example, the United States of America historically, regardless of who's in the White House, has a reputation as being among the worst negotiators. Americans don't know how to negotiate because we're so powerful. We can always say, well, you don't want to go along with us? Screw you. We'll cut you off economically. You can see this Donald Trump with his trade war. We'll bomb you if we have to. And so the Americans are actually, now I'm switching back to us being Americans. We're very lazy. The smaller countries, for example, like the Netherlands, are very good at negotiating because they don't have the power. It's sometimes in political science a lot, we talk about the paradox of power. The paradox of power can mean many things, but the paradox of power often says that those with the least power, when it comes to negotiations and diplomacy, have the most power because they have to find ways to be better at it, like learning different languages and learning different cultures. Americans still are hopelessly unilingual except for some of our Spanish-speaking friends. Not enough Americans travel abroad, although, I don't know if anyone's traveled or studied abroad, but, we have that option here. One of our students is doing full-time study in France right now. Americans are just hopelessly ignorant, whereas smaller countries, including Palestinians, by the way, most of whom, their educated class, have gotten their PhDs in England or the United States. So they're often trilingual, well-educated with university degrees from places other than Palestine. They're well-equipped because that's all they have. Then I've talked about that. You can take away my land, but you can't take away my education. And for those of us who are in a college setting, you know, the one thing, if I look at the course of my life, you know, no one's really taken anything away from me. But the one thing they can take away from me is my education. That's mine forever. What I've learned from studying, from life experience, it belongs to me. Unless you kill me, you can't take it away. And then one of the reasons for doing negotiations is, one, in order to present the Palestinian position, you have to have some sense of understanding of Palestine and Palestinians. So it's a way to learn, an active way to learn about what it means to be Palestinian. And that also, negotiations is a skill that you're going to be engaged in the rest of your life. So when Joyce would talk about this, she would talk about, think about back when you were a kid and you wanted to do something and your parents, you were pretty sure they were going to say no. The kids are clever. Kids start figuring out a way to get their parents to say yes. A friend of mine from Illinois talked about how he and his wife didn't want to get a dog for the kids. I think it was in Illinois. And so the kids, because they were at school and studying video production, produced a video about why having an animal was so good. Sent it to the parents, and the parents loved the video so much they broke down and got a dog. So the kids were basically negotiating. So we're all negotiating. Or, you bought a plain donut, because if your boyfriend doesn't like it, you can eat it. And, that's negotiations. The students are always negotiating with me. Well, can I have more time to do this? And what I find is that most students are very bad negotiators. One day a student came to me and she said, I don't know what she wanted, but she said to me, I know you went to law school and are trained as a lawyer, so I probably shouldn't ask this because I'm sure you're going to say no, but can I have extra time? Am I right that you're going to say no? Which is a really bad way to negotiate. And I just looked at her and I said, yes. Meaning you're right, you're not going to get extra time. She said, okay, bye. Well, I wanted to bring her back and say, look, that was like the worst negotiating thing you could have possibly done. You basically made my side and just said, are you going to, you don't do that. You say, I stepped on my dog and my grandmother got run over by a car and blah, blah, blah. You don't lie, but you give me a compelling reason. So we're all negotiating all the time. Or when you go out to get a job and somebody asks, well, how much do you want to get? There's, you're negotiating. I mean, when I first got hired here, I knew what they were trying to pay and I asked for a little more. And I got it. But that was negotiation. So the other thing was trying to teach negotiations. And that's all the Palestinians have. If they cannot negotiate their way into a better life, there's really no hope. The Israelis are not going to back down, nor is the United States government, just because it's the right thing to do. If we make the case for the right thing to do, it could get other people to put pressure on them. Like the Israeli government is starting to get embarrassed by some of the stuff that's coming out. And so what the Palestinians have done, or like even giving me the grant to go there to study, was to get American academics to understand their side. Very, very clever. It's part of negotiations. So I read about it, I went over there, then I start teaching about it. That's actually part of negotiations. And, other countries are very good about that. For example, the Chinese historically have sent a lot of their students over to the United States to get their degrees. And it wasn't necessarily because our universities were better, although a lot of times they are, than theirs. It was they would send the kids over here for 4 years, and the charge was, we'll get your degree and learn, but also interact with the American culture so you can come back and tell us how to sell to the Americans. So some Chinese kid spends 4 years here, goes back and says, well, here's how Americans go about buying. This is what attracts them. And it's made their companies very successful. So the end product It'd be nice if we got proposals adopted. But what I find with the simulation is it starts taking on the real world. People really start playing their roles. And I guess as Palestine, if we could get the rest of the countries in the negotiations to recognize the injustice that has been done to us, even if they don't solve it, but just to say, yeah, this is wrong, that's a step in the right direction. So how do we get them to understand that? Well, first we got to understand our own history, and then we got to explain it to them. So in the process, we're learning about Palestine. I guess that was a very long answer.
That's okay.
An excellent question.
Thank you.
Academics talk too much. Especially academics who went to law school and are in politics. Just talk way too much. So we've been doing this simulation for a very long time, and I always have fun. Mainly, and a lot of times you will too, because we don't know what the other countries are going to say. And I have no idea. The advisors from all these colleges across the United States are in touch with each other, but we don't tell each other what our delegations are going to say. And there's two other delegations, but they're at JCC, but I'm not going to reveal anybody's stuff. It's whatever you see. And it is all text-based in English. You don't have to learn Hebrew or whatever. But it's also a very effective way to teach writing, because you got to present this in a persuasive manner, and it's got to be well written. If it's not, you won't get your point across, and the other delegations will start pointing out your shortcomings. We've had delegations pointing out our misspellings or grammatical errors, and so you end up, students are correcting each other's work, which is exciting for me because I don't have to do it. Those countries are saying, you know, you didn't do this right, and that's part of it. You got it, and what happens in the real world in negotiations, especially if you're dealing with different languages and cultures, sometimes messages get misconstrued because they're written in such a way that it doesn't make any sense, or it's insulting to another country's culture, because you got to be very careful how you present. Now, the North Koreans are going to insult everybody, and they won't care. They have their own history to contend with, just like we do. There's one thing we have in common with them is it's our, the North Koreans. The Korean Peninsula was occupied from 1905 to 1945 when the Japanese lost the war. And then North Koreans would argue that basically the United States continued the occupation of the Korean Peninsula in the south. And we have been occupied first by the British with the Mandate starting with World War I, and then by the Israelis. So it's been over 100 years. How long before we get our independence? And the United States doesn't get that because our independence that we fought for was so long ago. Can't seem to understand it. Maybe other people have the same feeling. You'd think Americans would understand better, but we don't. I think because we're so horribly ignorant about the whole world. And I realize that I'm running out of time already, but I got to look into getting that article and getting the simulation scenario. But the simulation scenario, just send me an email directly to me from the syllabus. Don't send it to Blackboard, and ask for the scenario. And then I'll work on both the scenario and the article. If I don't get back to you right away, don't panic. I think I'm pretty free this afternoon, which is good. And then think about which role you want to play. And then just briefly, one of the things I'm going to probably do, and I'm going to think about writing assignments so that we can check your progress, is, once we get done, I'll give you plenty of time to do it. You do it out of class. I'll ask you to write a short description of what you understand about Palestine and the Palestinian people based on my presentations and based on the reading. And so what I'm really looking for, and I'm not going to worry about if it's correct, I just want to know what is your understanding of what it means to be Palestinian, what it means to be Palestine. And you can use the readings, you can use the lectures, to talk about. So, and I'll work on that over the weekend. So we have that to look forward to. I can't wait. I'd rather hear from you than me, even though I passed it myself. I will. Okay, I'll see you on Swell Friday.